Hi, thanks for joining me today. I'm Madeline and this is Leaving Babylon. Today I'm going to be covering part 5 of the Surrounding of the Camp series, which is the final installment of this series. And this one is called The Power of the Air. And I want to start off by reading the verse from Ephesians 2:2. Where in the time past you walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. I intended to cover this prior to my most recent video, which was Revealed, the Land of Jesus. However, in my research into the surrounding of the camp, or the compassing of the camp, it was imperative that I studied the lay of the land in more depth, and it became a fruitful exercise, as some of you might know. The findings were beyond my expectations. And if you haven't seen that video, please do. I will be referencing the findings of that, probably going forward in almost everything. So the question I thought of early in this series was, in reference to this topic, was what the tech? Because there's a very technological aspect to the compassing of the camp of the saints. And today we have technologies that rarely can be even grasped despite our so-called education. And I want to just unravel that a little bit. I probably won't be touching too much on AI, even though I intended to. That might be a separate topic of its own. But it definitely plays into it. I want to focus mostly on the energy aspect of our realm. And so, yeah, basically I've been studying this for a couple of years, and I think what I found here will ideally help us all better understand the scale and the breadth of the adversary's strategy across many layers of both military, politics, technology, and our daily lives. Another verse that comes to mind is in 2 Corinthians 10:4, and it says, "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds." And I guess throughout my research and in sharing this, my intention is actually to tear down strongholds. I think that's what we're called to do. I think we have the weapons, the spiritual weapon of faith, and we have the power of God, and we have the word, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God. And, I think that we are in a warfare. And the enemy knows we're in a warfare, but a lot of people, well-meaning people, especially Christians, do not even realize the level of this warfare that we're in. So I'm going to start off by just mentioning again, as I have in the past, that we live in an electrostatic realm and it's contained. And so, as per previous conversations, I do not believe that we are spinning randomly through a vacuum of space on a flying water ball that's, going Mach 76 or something like that, chasing the sun and revolving around all these other planets revolving around each other. I think it's ridiculous. We're on a biblical cosmology, or I should say we're within a biblical cosmology, and we are surrounded by energy. Energy is what powers this realm in which we live. And the generations that came before us knew this. They had access to that free energy that was in the atmosphere all around. And, God has not hidden these resources from us, but other people have. So that's just one thing to mention. The old Antiquitech, as many of us know who've been looking into this, was designed to actually gather, collect, and draw down or out of the atmosphere free energy, and it was free. There was nothing gauging it. It was, there was no charge, like no financial charge for it. It was given to us for our use, and it has actually been put behind a paywall now, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, essentially we're in an electrostatic realm. Everything interacts with the energy in our atmosphere and in all things. Actually, there's, we have electric charge. Everything around us has electric charge. The other energy I want to talk about is ether. And I think I want to make a distinction between ether energy and electrostatic energy or electrical energy. So to my understanding, electrical energy is the charge and ether is the conduit. So ether is the kind of, it's described in many ways, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but it's kind of the connecting force through all of nature. And it's what light travels through, it's what sound travels through, it carries. So it's kind of a messenger system, actually. And all of these components that we exist within, vibration, frequency, sound, they all are delivered by the etheric, it's in our air, it's in everything, it's within us, and sometimes I just think about it as kind of, and a lot of the ancient people did as well, was more of a spiritual aspect. So that realm in which the spiritual entities live. And, so when you start thinking about sound and vibration, and you start, thinking about things like prayer, for example, would be a good example of sending a message through the ether. You pray and you direct your prayer through Jesus Christ, and he speaks to the Father for you. And so when you send your message in the name of Jesus, that's where it goes. And I think that is indicative of a lot of what I'm going to talk about today on a more technological level. But that's what I wanted to, it really is a conduit. It's more than a conduit. It's a like 0-point energy delivery system, extremely efficient and all around us. So I want to read you the Noah Webster's Dictionary from 1818 and just a little bit of what that says. So ether, from to light up, kindle, to burn or blaze. A hypothetical medium of great elasticity and extreme tenity, supposed to pervade all space, the interior of solid bodies not accepted, and to be the medium of transmission of light and heat. And in chemistry, a very light, volatile, and inflammable fluid produced by distillation of alcohol. So I'll move on to the third one, supposed matter above the air or the air itself. And then ethereal, pertaining to the ether or to the higher regions beyond the earth or beyond the atmosphere. Celestial as ethereal space, ethereal regions. An example from Milton, go heavenly guest, ethereal messenger. And also consisting of ether, hence exceedingly light or airy, tenuous, spirit-like. And then Pope said, vast chain of being from which God began, nature's ethereal, human, angel, man. So obviously these are secular writers, but just to give you an example, that ether was maybe not well understood, but it was known to exist, and it was known to be the thing that connects everything. And often it's like that elastic component. It just keeps everything held together. Well, for me, that's actually God. That's the Spirit of God, right? It says the Spirit of God was on the waters, or the glory of God. The earth is filled with the glory of God. And I think, he created all things. He breathed life. He gave life to everything. And I just think that's indication of God being present all around us, and not in a New Age way, obviously, but just his life and how he sustains everything through his power. So that would be how I would explain it. And ether actually appeared on the 5 classical elements as well. And you can see there that we actually can see that one of the symbols is obviously the 6-pointed star. But those were the 5 classical elements. They are no more. So at the moment, we have earth, water, air, and fire. Used to be ether as well. And one of the objectives of what I want to talk about today in the theme of the surrounding of the camp is that 0-point energy, some people refer it to, or ether, is actually being weaponized. not only weaponized, but it's being used to profiteer, so for massive profits. And in my view, ether has also been used in more ways as a weapon. For example, and we'll look at this in a little bit. It was, the element of ether, I think, gave the people. People sometimes say, "Who are they?" when I always talk about they. But who I mean the people that came in after the millennial reign, who stood up the little season and who are involved in who are really involved in ruling during the little season. And they did it in a certain way. And we can go through that. But for now, I want to say that what really took place was they decommissioned the old infrastructure of the old free energy grids. They replaced them, and then they stood up and created new energy grids. And that was a very, very big task. They had to actually destroy a lot of cities to do it, because everything was just powered by very, very efficient. Even by today's standards, they would be considered extremely carbon neutral. You had like windmills, you had radium, you had ether and electrostatic, you had all of these methods of kind of, there was even natural gas was widely used. So, and then the methods to get around were very, less emission based, shall we say. So that's where I'm going. And I really want to just focus on just keeping the thread together here, because this is a very big topic and it's hard not to just like go off in a million different directions. So I'm trying to stay focused on what is ether and how does it play into the compassing of the camp of the saints and the beloved city. Because you first have to understand what is it in order to understand how are they using it and what are the potential possibilities for how this is all going to roll out, as we get closer to what I believe will be the Gog and Magog event. So a few of the aspects of ether, I believe that it's kind of being harvested and then resold. So if you think energy and electricity are in the air all around us, free and easily accessible, then the best way to profiteer off that is take it for free and then channel it through wires and such to people, gauge it, and start charging them to use it. And that is what's happened. So they've captured total control. The patenting, ownership, and profiteering is what has really been, I would say, the basis of this entire little season from a human perspective. The people, we might call them robber barons, came in and they took the land. They patented the water sources or claimed ownership of water sources. Electricity. So they gathered the electricity, they stood up their own infrastructure, and, they pretty much took ownership of the resources. And so now they're selling it back en masse to the entire world. And that has been a very profitable endeavor for them. Well, where are the profits going to? I believe they're going toward the Gog-Magog battle against the saints and the beloved city. So ether itself, I believe, is when you're harvesting it, it actually passes data. It does a lot of things, and I'll get a little bit more into that actually. We can see here the fall of Icarus, which puts me in mind of the fallen angels and, famously a lot of the other stories that we hear about people, or not people, the entities such as Prometheus and whatnot. So this is called Astra Castra, Experiments and Adventures in the Atmosphere. And one of the applications of the word ether is how they would use it to describe the heavens and the dimension, if you will, of the spirit. So that's just an example of that. Now, further down in the document, I think this is speaking about Roger Bacon in about the 1200s. Yeah. So in one of his works, he descants in glowing language on the possibility of constructing engines of immense size and power that could traverse the land and the water with great speed and carrying with them persons and merchandise. He then goes on to describe a plan of navigating the air. He assumes that the atmosphere is a material of some consistency capable of bearing upon its surface vessels, like ships are borne upon the surface of the water. He next describes the construction of his aerial machine, which, he said, must be a large hollow globe of copper or other suitable metal wrought extremely thin in order to have it as light as possible. It must then, he says, be filled with ethereal air or liquid fire, and then launched from some elevated point into the atmosphere, where it will float like a vessel on the water. There is certainly a flying instrument. Not that I ever knew a man that had it, but I am particularly acquainted with the ingenious person who contrived it. And this is just lending evidence to the existence of this material. And here Mendoza wrote, whether the element of fire be placed above the air, or what is still more credible than ether, that is the purest air. And then it says, thus, although these bodies are of greater specific gravity than our air, nevertheless, when shaped into a boat and filled with very light material, they can float in the air and are suitable materials for the construction of small ships, because the entire work composed of the little ship and the ether can be made lighter than an equal volume of our impure air, even in the highest region. So I'm just giving you some examples here of the understandings of ether back in the day. And so he's talking about his work written by Father Gallian of Avignon. And it contained a wild scheme of ascending mountains and enclosing the light ethereal air found at such altitudes in construction of canvas or cotton, while the machine he had the boldness to project and minutely describe was about 10 times the size of Noah's Ark and could have lifted the whole town of Avignon where he resided. So I'm just giving you an idea of the capabilities of what they believed about ether. To view bright meteors like the sun appear and stream their glories through the empty real air, to try the strong electric ether's power, to explore the sources of the gladdening shower. And it was just really, really widely considered to be not just powerful, but extremely useful for flight, actually, which I find really interesting. And so when we talk about things like anti-gravity aircraft, some might call it UFOs, things like that. So just keep in your mind that this very ancient technology was removed from our awareness, but as in it like a common awareness, but people still know about it and it is being used regularly and widely. We just don't know about it. So here I'm aware that an opinion is very prevalent among aeronauts. So those are the people that drove the airships, piloted the airships, and which is also favored by some meteorologists of distinction, especially those of Germany and France, that all these changes are confined to the lower regions of the atmosphere, and that beyond a certain elevation, a state of perfect, or at least comparative tranquility, may be looked upon as the natural condition of the ethereal space. And here it says, in nothing is this more strongly exemplified than in the appearance of the firmament itself. The color of the sky, the increasing darkness of which we have already noticed, has now reached a pitch of intensity so great as scarcely to seem compatible with the ethereal consistency of a mere gaseous accumulation, and almost to warrant the impression of an approach to something whose limits are more substantial and defined. So they're obviously going on talking about the appearance of ether. And here, you have heard of spirits that sail away to the realms that glisten with endless day, where the clouds scarce lift their giant forms in their far dim march to the lands of storms, where the ocean of ether heaves around and silence and dew alone are found. Kind of, I don't know, some of that just makes me think of a place we haven't been before. And here, was it not justifiable in supposing that Mr. Valls said that this apparent condensation of volume has in its origin in the compression of the same ethereal medium I have spoken of before, and which is dense in proportion to its vicinity to the sun? So now they're relating kind of this ethereal feature or element to the sun, and kind of that in our realm where the celestial bodies live. And here, this document actually talks more about ether technology and a rational approach to gravity control. So you can see here, the ether is what they're really using to create unidentified flying objects, UFO type craft or anti-gravity aircraft. And I just think that's quite interesting. So it goes on to actually talk about, I won't read too much of this one, but it just says basically, early wave physicists postulated in ether filling space and all transparent substances. Light consisted of waves in this ether, which thus carried light, even though an apparent vacuum, and was therefore called a luminiferous or light-carrying ether. James Clerk Maxwell defined ether as a material substance of a more subtle kind than visible bodies, supposed to exist in those parts of space which are apparently empty. Newton employed the term for the medium, which fills space, including the space which appears to be occupied by matter. For to him the ether must also penetrate between atoms in the pores of matter. Then if you just go further down here, the apparatus which lifted itself and floated in the air, so this is 1973, which was described by Mr. Kitzelman, was not a massive dielectric as described in the English patent. And then it talks about the electrodes, wires, and energies in the sketch. The above experiment was an improvement on the experiment performed in Paris 1955 and 56 on disc airfoils. The Paris experiments were the same as those shown to Admiral Radford in Pearl Harbor 1950. And then just down here it says electric wind in a hard vacuum. And so this is an electrokinetic apparatus, so creating energy from the air using wind. And these are the patents, electrokinetic generators. And so you can see even the shape of them sort of allows for them to be used in these kinds of machines. So you've got negative charge underneath, positive charge on top, and it basically just lifts. It's quite interesting with a charge. And yeah, so I found that quite interesting. And just more about energy. So this document here is the Electrical Experimenter from 1919, and they do actually talk about This is called cold fire, and this is something that Nikola Tesla was known for doing in his lab. Just talks a lot about the lightning and, making lightning kind of surround people. It does actually make me think of the kind of the iconic Lucifer appearance as an angel of light. And so when we're talking about the prince of the power of the air, that's kind of what it puts me in mind of. And so, I'm starting to draw a question around the loosing of Satan as kind of embedded within this study. And how does that fit into this narrative? Because we know that the prince of the power of the air, and I'm drawing this out here, is that the power of the air is known very well to our adversary. And that is distinctly visible in the people that brought us these so-called technologies and the technologies that are being used in the building warfare of Gog and Magog. So it just says here, ever since Nikola Tesla began experimenting with the high-frequency currents which bear his illustrious name, the world has stood aghast at the many and wonderful effects made possible only by his discoveries. And then it talks about, frequency stunts in his laboratory, and, he'd be seen standing around just with massive volts. It says here, while waiting for an electric train out on Long Island, amusedly watched two boys who took turns in jumping upon a live third rail carrying 500 volts. They would jump upon the rail with both feet at once and then balance themselves upon the rail. There is, of course, no danger to this as long as both feet are on the rail. One foot on the rail, the other foot on the ground means certain death, and so on. And here, a dry bath with cold fire, although millions of volts are used in the process, this form of bath is quite pleasant. The currents throw off all dead skin, scale, and dirt clinging to the skin. Besides, the treatment is distinctly invigorating, leaving the skin rosy and all tingling. Every home will soon be equipped with huge Tesla coil. So there's hygiene for you using electricity. Quite the thing. Okay, so we'll move to one more document, then I'll go back to some slides. This one talks about 0-point energy. And just briefly, I'll just go to the front little bit of it. So I noticed that there are times where ether is actually referred to as the E field. And anyway, so today's physics might allow the possibility of tapping virtually limitless quantities of energy directly from the fabric of space. They have to rename everything, so now it sounds like a whole new science, but actually this is an old science that was very well known. And I'll just read one more piece here. The last point is clearly the most speculative. If true, it offers virtually limitless energy. Okay. So I'm going to go back here and talking about ether and that really highly connective, conductive quality that it has. And I'll show you that I truly believe that they use the ether to pass data, which is why when you plug in your Ethernet cable, you can get data into your computer. You can access data, but you're paying for the Ethernet. You're paying for the data. And it's exact same model as electricity. They feed the electricity into cables so that we can charge things. Do you see how that works? So it's all in the air. And we are sold these lies, such as there's satellites, going around the earth, and there's just all these thousands of satellites up there, but you can't actually see any of them. And when they fall, they seem to have these balloons attached to them. So my expression when I see really ridiculous things that don't make any sense is whatever forever. I cannot cope with the ridiculousness of the things we're told compared to the reality, which in all honesty, is kind of lame. But these so-called satellites, I believe, are transmitting data to an extent. They're doing things like surveillance and other things like that. But really harnessing the capabilities of Aether to pick up messages and send signals, coordinating communications. I think a lot of this is drawn directly from the atmosphere. I don't even think these satellites are actually necessary. I think they serve a purpose, but I'm not sure how efficient this technology actually is. I think some of what we're going to see today was probably more fallen angel knowledge, and it was, gained through consorting with fallen angels. So these two men here, one of my favorite authors was Charles Dickens, and I do have a video called What the Dickens, and it's about and it's in my Technocratic Takeover series. And it's really interesting to note that the way that Dickens was used to portray the Victorian times was actually to be very impoverished, very dark, very smoky, very class kind of, there was class struggle, right? But what we know now when we look back at the old technology, the Antiquitech, the old buildings and structures that they had, was I think that energy was a lot more widely available. I think that, if anything, the Industrial Revolution was given its impetus because of the free energy that was available. And, I think it didn't just happen like the way that they say it did. So when I talk about a tale of two towers, we have the Tesla Tower, which is a kind of harnessing ether energy and electrostatic energy from the air and the ground, and I think it was just collected. It was there was coils, there was these oscillation features to them, so that they would just gather, and conduct and increase and make the most of this energy. So one thing I will contend with in the whole story of the Victorians and all of these things is the Atlantic cable, because I do not believe it is functional. I'm not sure it's even there. So the existence of the Atlantic, cross-Atlantic cable story is to keep people preoccupied with cables, in my view. And really what I think is that it's programmed us, not just the cable itself, but all of the cables that we have. Everything is attached to a cable. And what it's done is it's programmed us to believe that communications require wires, and that this is what connects us all, that wires actually connect us all. Actually, it's wires that are the bait and switch. So this is just extra programming. Cables are used to profit off of us using these technologies, and because they gauge how much we're using, and they are the providers of it to us, when actually they actually get the data and the electricity for free, the power and the electricity, or the data. So I think that, and having looked into this more, I'll show you more evidence of this, but Tesla and Eiffel, Gustav Eiffel, actually lived at the same time. And these two towers were actually in operation at the same time. There is another Tesla tower, which is called the Wardenclyffe Tower. And that was actually, I believe, communicating with the Eiffel Tower. So when you understand the extent at which communication could travel from New York to Paris, at, like way back in the 1800s, you realize that they've had us all on with this. They've kept us in the dark, and they've allowed us, literally, and allowed us to struggle and to be introduced to their new technology, their new infrastructure, their new apparatuses, and we've had to wait through gates as they release it, and it's all based on profit. So both of these towers actually represent the power of the air. And famously, and I've covered this in other series, but Paris was the center of the revolution in the 1700s, 1800s, as well as a key partner with the Americans in the American Revolution. And all of these revolutions were happening around the same time. And what I think is that they were all instrumental at the time of the loosing of Satan, because they needed to control the power of the air, they needed to profit off of the power of the air, but they also needed to harness the data out of the air. And for many reasons, they've been listening to everything everyone says since all that time. So there's literally actually nowhere you can hide as a person. You will be found because of this wireless technology that is in the air, and we'll talk more about that. So Gustav Eiffel, the tower, the famous Eiffel Tower, is not his only creation. Apparently he was a true genius. And so he also designed the dome on the Nice Observatory, the Statue of Liberty, and the Bordeaux Railway Bridge. So it says here that he built a viaduct, a railway station in Hungary. This guy was all over the place. But I think the ones I'm focusing on here are actually the Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower. But you can see here, so how many things he's been credited with building. Oh, the Panama Canal locks as well, apparently. So he was finding a practical application for the tower, which allegedly had only been built to stand for 20 years, of course. And he employed it in wind resistance experiments as a meteorological observation point, and above all, as a giant aerial mast for the new science of radio broadcasting. He collected meteorological data as posts installed in his various properties, and he was researching aerodynamics, wind tunnel, right at the foot of the tower, and all of that. The one thing I would like to say is that the foot of the tower, there's something really uncomfortable and culty about everything in Paris, in my view. But under the Eiffel Tower, there's actually these caves, and if you know where the Eiffel Tower is built, it's on the Champ de Mars, which is really a site of a massacre that kicked off the French Revolution. And they were really worshiping the goddess of reason and the supreme being. So they were having these festivals. There was bloodshed, but then there was this massive tower of light built on that site. And there's something about it that just makes me think there is something way more spiritual about this. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But this document here, or this article, talks about was the Eiffel Tower built to be part of Tesla's free energy network? The truth they've been hiding from us all along. So Tesla developed the Wardenclyffe Tower on Long Island to give remote wireless power. So now picture a grid of these towers beaming power around the planet for free from the atmosphere. And then it talks about financier JP Morgan was backing him. And then the tower was demolished for scrap in 1917. There's always these really lame excuses. Obviously, they were understanding the energy. They were, harnessing all this wireless technology. And, it was a cover-up job. They figured it out, and then they revisioned what they were going to do so that they could carry on. So there are some who think the Eiffel Tower may have had a covert mission. And here they talk about wireless electricity. Of course, because we know that there's ether and electrostatic energy in the air. Accounts from that era also talk about strange lights and electromagnetic activity around the tower. Could the Eiffel Tower be a hidden key to Tesla's energy network? Well, yeah, I think it could be. And then the Wardenclyffe Tower was constructed to send energy wirelessly and demonstrated capability of transmitting signals across great distances. So these towers would serve to transmit wireless energy. Okay, and then why isn't the Eiffel Tower included in Tesla's energy plan? Was the technology too advanced for its time, or have vested interests that blocked the idea of free energy? If the tower was constructed in accordance with Tesla's principles, there's no reason why it would not be possible to make Watt Tower a power station for the entire world. And then today, modern day scientists are working on wireless energy solutions. Of course they are. They're working on it. Everything. It's like cancer research. They're working on it. When we say they're working on free energy solutions, it's not free for us. It's free so that they can make more profits. But they're already doing it. This is evidence of it. Due to verifiable similarities between the Eiffel Tower and Wardenclyffe Towers, many myths surround these two towers standing at an electromagnetic breakthrough with unknown technology on Tesla's behalf, supposedly under direct cover of the government. Of course it was. Okay, and here, Tesla Life and Legacy. So Tesla suggested that it would be possible to control the weather. Okay, so this is a really key component of what we're seeing now. I think when we're talking about HARP, for example, and some of the weather systems that we know are patented, this isn't secret information. This is all publicly available. So he suggested that it would be possible to control the weather with electrical energy. He predicted machines that would make war an impossibility, of course, but that's not the way these people are. And he proposed a global system of wireless communications. So JP Morgan was the sponsor of this work, and a world system. So Tesla proposed a world system of wireless communications to relay telephone messages across the ocean. Well, look, we text people anywhere. To broadcast news, music, stock market reports, private messages, secure military communications, and even and even pictures to any part of the world. When wireless is fully applied, the Earth will be converted into a huge brain capable of response in everyone's part of the world. So think hive mind. For anyone who's watched the movie Cell with John Cusack and Samuel L. Jackson, it's actually disturbing. So Morgan offered Tesla $150,000 to build a transmission tower and plant. We're talking the 1800s here, guys. Like, this is not new technology, and it actually goes way back further than that. They were hacking it so they could figure out how to charge us for it. Why would someone like JP Morgan invest in this technology? It's because he's a stakeholder. He's an investor in it. An investment actually turns a profit at some point. So this is not just pie in the sky. They're just toying around with things. And if Tesla did disappear, then I'm not surprised, because they figured it out. Well, he figured it out. So, they took the technology and he was no longer needed, something like that. Tesla's actual plan was to make a large-scale demonstration of electrical power transmission without wires. Of course, because it's all around us. Tesla acquired land on the cliffs of Long Island, and it was called Wardenclyffe. So beneath the tower, a well-like shaft plunged 120 feet into the ground. 16 iron pipes were driven 300 feet deeper so that currents could pass through them and seize hold of the earth. In this system that I've invented, Tesla explained, it is necessary for the machine to get a grip of the earth. Otherwise, it cannot shake the earth. It has to have a grip so that the whole of this globe can quiver. This is extremely dangerous technology. Then on December 12, 1901, the world awoke to the news that Macaroni had signaled the letter S. What does S stand for? across the Atlantic from Cornwall, England to Newfoundland. 17 Tesla patents to accomplish the transmission. So the first letter signaled across the Atlantic was the letter S. It's very, very curious. Curious. And here is just a little note on Wardenclyffe Tower. So even according to Wikipedia, also known as the Tesla Tower, it was intended to transmit messages, telephony, and even facsimile images across the Atlantic Ocean to England and to ships at sea based on his theories of using the Earth to conduct the signals. So you can see why I say I don't believe that the Atlantic cable exists, or if it does, it's not doing anything, because this technology is way superior to that. They don't need cables. They don't need cables going under the ocean. It's all going through the air. Okay. His decision to increase the scale of the facility and implement his ideas of wireless power transfer. And then it says, the system was met with refusal to fund the changes. And, they act like it was all just panned, like this is a bad idea. The project was abandoned, never to become operational. I don't believe that. I think it was operational. I think it has been operational ever since. So Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison are two men that are called, that this article refers to as Fire and the Wizards of Light. So if we just go down here, so Tesla made his home in 1884. He began his work in electrical engineering in Europe, transferring from the Continental Edison Company in Paris to the Edison Machine Works in New York. Tesla had an opportunity to meet Edison and work on improving arc light designs, but quit the job soon after to develop electrical lighting in his own. By the time Tesla had come to New York, Edison had already developed an effective, long-lasting, incandescent light bulb. But there was only limited infrastructure in place to power the light bulbs because they had to first tear everything else down to make sure they could put in their new infrastructure. Edison, that's not what this article says, I'm just adding. Edison Electric supplied direct current, DC, to its customers, which could only be delivered short distances from the power plants, effectively limiting services to the city. So you see how they contrived the new technology to replace the old technology, because the new technology would actually be profitable. That's the whole point of the whole thing. And this company here is called Worldview.Space. So SNC successfully completes global stratospheric ISR flight for UK's Project Aether. So it talks about this demonstration of a high-altitude balloon for stratospheric communications and intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance. The test was part of the UK Ministry of Defence, MOD, Project Aether, Flight 1 Assessment Phase contract. SNC's rapidly deployable HAB, developed, launched and operated by Worldview, offers global, persistent and uninterrupted ISR with communication capabilities at higher altitudes in near real time. The system is capable of targeting geolocations anywhere in the world and offers immediately available and exploitable data using a range of existing resources. So this technology is being used. It's not a mystery. There's just a lot that we don't know about because we're not taught. They just leave it out of our learning pathway, or whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to go back here, and I just want to highlight that these people are actually Liberty Cult icons, and the towers that they built or build, and the reference to the light bearer and that kind of ultimate rebellion, the ultimate rebels against God, are the people that are carrying this technology. It's like a baton, they're carrying it to each other, and they are, kind of always working toward total liberation from the laws of God. And that's what it's all about. They don't want God over them. And it just, again, the story of King Saul and the Israelites, where they rejected God as their leader and opted to have Saul as their king. And so one of the things that I kind of thought about as I was looking at this was these people are kind of passing the light. So from France, let's say, to America, and they're taking this technology with them. And I would say that the people who are these light bearers, who sort of personify Prometheus as he stole the light from Mount Olympus in the myth and the legend, they believe it's their right to have this and to do what thou wilt. That is their belief system. And so I think, as we start looking at other, ancient mythology and icons of this, you can see this pervading theme. We have, the light bearer, the giver of light, and all of these themes that point to the prince of the power of the air from Ephesians 2:2 that we read earlier. And it's a false light. And, the Bible tells us that the enemy comes disguised as an angel of light. And so we have to be very careful with how, and what we're actually in support of. One of the early advocates of the false light was actually Benjamin Franklin. And he was famously the Postmaster General for the United States. He also was a member, famously, of the Hellfire Club. They found human remains in his London home. And the Hellfire Club was said to have a president who was Satan, or the devil himself. And Benjamin Franklin was actually, pivotal in the liberation of the colonies of America. And, if you want to go look back at some of my other videos, I cover quite a lot regarding Benjamin Franklin. But this one experiment stands out in this kind of light bearer technology era of the little season. And just highlighting some of the words that Benjamin Franklin wrote about this so-called experiment that he did. And I think it's actually more symbolic than real. He wrote, "Rain has wet the kite and twine so that it can conduct the electric fire freely." Okay. "You will find it stream out plentifully from the key on the approach of your knuckle. At this key the file may be charged, and from electric fire thus obtained spirits may be kindled, and all the other electric experiments be performed, which are usually done by the help of a rubbed glass globe or tube, and thereby the sameness of the electric matter with that of light completely demonstrated." So there's a few odd things about this picture. But, I think they knew a lot more about so-called electric fire than having to put a key on a kite in a electrical storm. I think they already had all of this technology. It was widely known. It wasn't a big mystery. I think that was just a kind of demonstration to teach children and to indoctrinate children. But I think this was actually a very occult game that they were playing on people. And one of the weirdest things I actually noticed in this is the knuckle. So I always thought he was just holding onto the kite, and then, the key would kind of capture the electricity. But no, he actually specifically identifies a knuckle. And I was like, that's a very strange thing to say. So I found And, I think it might have to do with this, because I think the story is actually symbolic anyway. I'm not going to try and pronounce this. Astrogalomancy. Oh, maybe I did. Okay. Astrogalomancy. So basically, it's a variation of claromancy, involves divination through the process of casting lots. The term originates from a combination of the Greek words astrogaios, referring to dice or knuckle bones, and manteia, pertaining to divination. So they inscribe the bones or the dice with numbers and letters and so on. And it says here that among the Greeks, dice were crafted from sheep knuckle bones. I didn't even know sheep had knuckle bones. Did you? The act of rolling dice held a connection with the deities Athena and Hermes. Well, famously, we know that these deities are represented on the apotheosis of George Washington. These are the people that were bringing this false light were actually very much occultists. They believed in these deities and they worshipped these deities. And so it was used to select government officials and make other significant decisions, serving as less susceptible form of democracy compared to elections. So prior to democracy or the independence of the United States, were they just basically doing divination to get their way? And we know that this went back even further into the courts of Europe. The magicians were present there as well. So it just made me wonder, what would it be? What kind of divination was Benjamin Franklin actually doing, hanging out in caves underneath London and amassing human remains in his house? What kind of divination was this man actually undergoing? And what was this lightning that was actually coming down from the sky? And it got me thinking that, it's really hard to avoid the possibility that the loosing of Satan had something to do with this electricity, this electric fire, and sorcery magic, and even code release. So when I say that, I mean in respect to the technologies that they gained. So the codes that they needed to access the power of the air, the ether, the wireless technology, the telephony, and all of this, what we would think of as more modern technology, they were actually accessing it way back then so that they could take control of data and electricity and power and, set up their own kingdom on these infrastructures. And we know that Luke 10:18 says that Jesus told them that I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. So, it begs the question, this kind of connection between the loosing of Satan, the little season, and all of these technologies being harnessed and kind of brought to the forefront as if these people were actual wizards. Well, I do think they're kind of wizards. I think they're actually magic by way of, the demonic information that they received. And I think these are just indications of them telling us who they are. And what I thought was quite interesting was the tale of two towers. You have Tesla on one side and you had Eiffel on the other, so New York and Paris, and you had these two towers on the other side of the water. And then we have the two towers of Lord of the Rings, famously, and we have the two wizards. And then we have these other kind of time lords, these, TV people that use these little sticks that have glowing, what I would say looks like ether or electrokinetic energy in them. And I would say this is the hidden power of the air being demonstrated right in front of our eyes. And we've been really flashy thinged, like in the Men in Black. We've been dumbed down. Any former knowledge of any of this was wiped from humanity's knowledge. And, I'm not saying I want to have all this technology for me, but, the Lord would have created this realm for us to live in peace, without war, without strife. Because when you're not fighting for resources, when you're not fighting for energy and for power to actually have lights and heat in your home, there's a lot more peace, I'm sure of it. And so putting all of this behind a paywall, hiding it all within cables, not allowing the population of the earth that God has created to access this beautiful energy that he created, it's criminal, actually. But this is how they have become so incredibly wealthy. This is how they have done it. And yeah, so underneath all of this is really the theme of the loosing of Satan and the prince of the power of the air and the kind of spirit sort of related aspect to the existence of Satan and his, I guess his minions, I imagine, who are here to stop us from learning the truth about Jesus, stop us from following God and his will for us, and to corrupt us and, really ultimately to get back at God, I would say. And, it kind of reminds me as well of the story of the genie, which I guess in Arabic, genies are actually demons. But in the story of Aladdin, where the genie comes out of the containment in the lamp, and you kind of get this etheric quality to that containment, and it just reminds me of the Satan being bound and then being loosed. And this, I just think there is a lot that goes together in all of these themes. And I think Satan had a long time to think about how he was going to deceive the entire world. And I think it's gone, sadly, very well in that respect. All of these technologies that are transmitting data, they are creating hive mind, they are keeping us subject to these high tariffs on our power, on our electricity, on our telephones, and all of this. And it's putting humanity in a situation that's kind of on its knees. And if you think about the warfare that creates, the oppression that creates against a people group that God has created for his glory, and this kind of oppression that takes place through deception, it's a very big deception. So when we look back at the ancient technology, the beautiful architecture, it's not hard to imagine why they dismantled so much of that. And even sadly, recently, the Notre Dame Cathedral in France, in Paris, and through the bombings, the wars, the bombings and the wars, these structures represented a threat to the enemy because, our voices, the truth that we speak, there was probably over the ages, over the millennial reign, there was people going into these buildings and speaking the truth of God, encouraging, healing. The atmosphere would have been filled with, I believe, just all glory to God. There was no deception, right? So that environment had to go away if Satan was going to successfully deceive the nations. And you can't have all these vibrations going around, especially from churches, especially from old cathedrals. And the bells, they had to go too, because they're too healing. you have to weaken the population in order to really deceive them really, really well. And then you start feeding them data, images, sounds that are very oppressive. Think of some of the music that's around today. That's not healing in any way. It's very destructive to the spirit. It's very destructive to the thought patterns and the vibrations that go on in your mind and in your body. So I think all of this beautiful vibration and frequency, it had to be done away with and replaced with square boxes, this modern sort of form of being in a box where there's no sound vibration. And in one of I mentioned it before, my technocratic takeovers, I cover an old book. And it is such an interesting book. I hope you can all go see it. But really, it just walks through some of the things that went on over a period of time. And I want to focus in, and it's written in French, so some of this is translated, but on the left side is electricity, the great slave. And on the right side, the removal of the old world infrastructure, history, and traditions. And I'm just going to zoom in on these pictures a little bit without them being too blurry. But you'll see electricity is actually shackled hands and feet to this machine and turning the gears. Okay. And this this depiction is of electricity. And then the hair is actually going to power poles. So these are like wires actually. And then this goblin type creature is holding up a light. So all of this is powering this light. But even up in the air, you'll see these little creatures in the sky sending envelopes. And I find that really, really interesting because it's like a little hidden message saying we're actually delivering messages through the air now. And then there's a lightning bolt that goes across there as well. And yeah, it's just the industrialization of power. So the industrialization of electricity, which was supposed to be a useful thing and beautiful for us. Okay. And this picture here is the clearance of the old world. So some of the words on the picture I've just translated here. So site of the demolitions, tradition, history, dynamite. The old ideal reinstated to museums and to other curiosities. So basically, they decommissioned all of the old world and just relegated it to museums and like, hey, look at the past. We're in the present now. We're going forward in the new industries. And you can see all the smoke rising around in the background. But this kind of old world depiction, she's trying to save this beautiful building, but this horrible iron figure with a light bulb is looking very stern there in the background. And then you have these men in their top hats, placing dynamite in these buildings. One has a smile. Oh, they both have smiles and a little pointy beard. And these people are just demolishing this beautiful old cathedral. And then you have this horse pulling away a cart full of histories, tradition, and just taking it all to the junk heap. And then here, the old ideal is actually being dismantled. So the arm is pulled off, and this angel is being basically carted away to museums and curiosities. And these people are responsible for it. See? Fascinating picture, breaks my heart, but the person who wrote this book actually knew what was going on. And I think that's important to recognize, that there were actually people documenting and taking note of what was going on. But if you go watch that one, it's called La Vie Electrique, and it's in my Technocratic Takeover series. And the whole book is really, really interesting. So moving on, the other aspect of our environment is actually frequency. And this is something that is being weaponized. And I've mentioned HARP earlier, but now we have 5G towers. Who knows what else is going through our environment? Harvesting data, using frequencies to wage weather warfare and all kinds of things. And I think also working in tandem with a lot of the other kind of bioweapons that we have recently been exposed to in our culture. So frequency is a big one. You can't hear it, you can't see it. It is a totally invisible weapon. I think it can be used for good. Obviously, there are sort of people that do treatments with frequencies and things like that. But on the whole, in this industrial society in which we live, where everything is industrialized, it is actually a weapon, and it is a profiteering mechanism to really enslave us to the coercions and the manipulations of frequencies. So these people I call the Gog fathers of little season engineering and data profiteering, or little season energy profiteering and data profiteering. Just looking at them briefly, we've talked about a few of them. So Benjamin Franklin, Gustav Eiffel, Alexander Tesla, Alexander Bell, Thomas Edison, and believe it or not, John George Trump. That is, I think, the uncle of Donald Trump. So in my various different research videos, I've talked about the Trump family showing up at the Klondike, now showing up in the energy business. These people are very, very involved in the overall little season Gog Magog ventures of funding and designing the compassing of the saints and the beloved city. And how they're using these technologies is really to weaken the masses, the population, and to profit off of us as well. Alexander Graham Bell is somebody that was really the patent owner of the device that would send and receive signals. We call them telegrams, signaling through the air. You know, that was common back in the 1800s. Telegrams were, regularly received through the air. They had telegraph poles, and and then it turned into the telephone, and your telephone number was basically your kind of address for the signals. And so someone could type your number in, and that number was kind of like your IP address in the original technology design. And so your house and your location and your messages, your voice and your signal were all being transmitted through the air and then through the wires, which would eventually be charged to you for use. And, I think the point of location was something else that I would say that Benjamin Franklin in specific, being the postmaster general, where are things delivered to? Where are they picked up from? These are all really, really critical connections to make in understanding how all of this fits together. You as a person, before you were even born, you were logged, by your birth certificate. Well, when you were born, you were logged in their system by your birth certificate, and everything that really happens in our homes and in our lives is done by our address, who we are and where we are, and then all of the data and signals that relate to us. And so is this all being collected is my question. I think it's worth asking these questions. So radio waves are another very, very big component of this. And if you've been questioning, oh, well, does ether actually exist? Can you actually pick up, messages out of the air? Well, just think about radio waves. Yes, you can. You can dial into a certain radio wave signal and you can pick up voices. You can pick up anything. The thing is that ether delivers all of this through the air, whether it be frequency, whether it be radio waves, whether it be light and sound. All of these are delivered by ether. And that's just something that I think is really key into grasping exactly how surrounded we are by the number of technologies that are witnessing everything we do. Let's just put it that way. And we are also tuning into a lot of casting, right? So when we think back to what I was talking about with Benjamin Franklin and the knuckle bones being cast, like casting lots, divination. Now you're broadcasting programs through the ether into people's minds and their ears, right? And then if it's television frequencies, it's through their eyes. So you get the point that all of this is traveling through the air and we can just tune in to anything. So what are we tuning into? I think that's another important, responsible question to ask ourselves. So when we're talking about wireless data, we have wireless telegraphy, and it's the transmission of text messages by radio waves, analogous to electrical telegraphy using cables. So they say before 1910, the term wireless telegraphy was also used for other experimental technologies for transmitting telegraph signals without wires. So they're admitting that they actually used wireless technology way back, like way before our time, right? In radio telegraphy, information is transmitted by pulses of radio waves of two different lengths called dots and dashes, which spell out text messages, usually Morse code. So when I mentioned earlier about Benjamin Franklin receiving a source code, I think in my mind, they were looking for ways to, I think, engage with either the loosed Satan or demonic entities, and they wanted to be involved in the this little season. They wanted to be kind of the forerunners, the movers and shakers of the rebellion, and they were very much at the forefront. So people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and, that crew of people were very much involved in the establishing of all of this. And, they were very occult in their methods. And, we know that wireless data transference via Ethernet and via the World Wide Web and the internet, all of these words actually tell us that we are kind of stuck in a web. We're kind of stuck. This is our existence in this realm. And I'm not trying to bum anyone out here, but what I'm trying to say is, like, in a sense, spiritually, we are surrounded. We are compassed about, right? So Internet of Bodies, I don't want to talk about that too much, but I would like to just say that for sure, the events of 2020 created a population of walking IP addresses through nanotechnology. And now, the signals are received into a person's body. So that's, that was all. I've read the studies here in Canada. It went to court in terms of being allowed to insert bio nanotechnology into a person's body. And, the way that they did it was just relentless, like relentlessly using medical suitability for technology such as this to locate diseases and target a specific cell and cure diseases. And really, this is just their deceptive way of patenting and having the approved technology to put into people's bodies. And through coercion and manipulation, that happened en masse all over the earth. So, just levels of surrounding, levels of compassing about. I would say that now, technology now works with people's bodies. Realistically, it's already happening. Everyone also has their phone and device to keep them located. They're harvesting the data. They are, this is kind of that singularity effect. And I know many here probably already know more than I do about this, but Mr. Warp Speed, DJT, famously, biometric tracking in all people, on land, on sea, wherever people are. That was the method that they did that. So, now your carbon footprint can be tracked to your body. Maybe you can be billed for it. So this whole new industry is now tracking what it means to be alive as a person. And again, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but that is kind of what's happened. I believe that salvation is through Jesus Christ. Nothing can separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so I want you to hold on to that. There's nothing that can come between us and our Lord. He lives in us. The Holy Spirit, I believe, immunizes any evil, his people against any evil that has happened. And also, we should revoke our consent. Speak that. Revoke your consent to be used as a experiment, as an IP, as a walking IP. We are citizens of heaven. We do not belong to this world. So I encourage you to speak that into the ether because it's listening. Something else I want to just highlight here. So we know that signal transference via wireless has been a thing for a long time. This is not new technology. Dots and dashes, code going through the air. These are all very well understood. And just going back to the Prince of the Power of the Air, I think that at the changeover of rulership during the little season from the millennial reign, everything became about profit. Everything became about control. Everything became about they want all of the access and control to everything. I mean, can you imagine living in a world like that? Thank goodness we have the Lord Jesus Christ who's going to save us from all of this and restore everything to the Father. So one of the other things I noticed on the journey was really the existence not just of the airships and not just of the ether technology and how that was being weaponized to destroy the old infrastructure, to destroy the old architecture, to really take down the old world. But we know that the wars were in large part, the objective was really to destroy much of the old cities that were still there. And you have to stage these things. You have to make people run for cover, go hide in your bomb shelter while we just decimate your whole city. Okay. And I believe that airships don't, fly around now, but they did then. And maybe they do now. And maybe they do similar things now. They're supposedly very quiet. And if you go around in the dark, who knows what they could do? They could probably start fires. So yeah, dirigibles, world wars, revolutions, the burning of the cities, the energy warfare. It's very silent. These airships were, they didn't have a fuel kind of limitation on them. So they could just fly around for hours just destroying things. And I do believe that's what happened. So getting back to Greenland, modern day, what's going on? We talked about a lot of technologies in this whole system that is designed and has been coordinated and planned and implemented over, let's say, a couple of 100 years, 250 years maybe, to bring us to a place where now the overall goals, I think, have been met. We know that Mars is the god of war, so called in the mythology. We know that Greenland extends right across the center, the broad plain of the earth, and on the other side of Greenland is the Terra de Jesu, the land of Jesus. We know that the North is being militarized. We know that the United States Space Force and SpaceX with Elon Musk are both being highly funded. And surprise, surprise, the Arctic is their target. They cite China and Russia as being their opposition. And we're going to see this ramping up. We're going to actually see this building. We know that there is anti-gravity technology. We know that they use the Aether to a large extent. JP Morgan was one of the main funders of that technology, using Tesla for his skills in working with that. And, I think it's just the writings on the wall, so to speak. We know that this is going to happen. Prophecy plays out. It always does. We know we just found the land of Jesus. We know they've been hiding it. This is something that they're getting very close to the end on, because as information comes out, as the Holy Spirit reveals more and more, we are going to be really face to face with the reality that this is the situation. So we're going to keep our eyes on the North, and just to go back a minute to Donald J. Trump's uncle, John G. Trump. So this man was an American electrical engineer, physicist, and inventor who engineered high voltage electrostatic generators and found new applications for them in medicine industry and nuclear science. I actually am of the view that nuclear refers to ether. I think at that level they actually are very familiar with ether and its potential. We also have places like CERN hanging around, and I'll go into that another time, but CERN is definitely another one to probably be concerned about. But this man here was, MIT involved, which we know is a very influential military-driven technology institute. And even to the fact that during World War II, Trump was a key figure in delivering radar to Allied forces through MIT Rad Lab, and the war's largest civilian scientific enterprise. And he was part of the National Defense Research Committee. So let's just say that Donald J. Trump's background is very steeped in the technology of Tesla, which is why actually it makes a lot of sense that he and Elon Musk are that close, because I believe that his uncle inherited the Tesla technology. Let me just see. Interestingly as well, John Trump was the youngest of 3 children born to German immigrants, Frederick and Elizabeth Christ Trump, which is a very odd name for someone to be called. And we probably mostly are aware of that, but I just had to put that out there. And the other thing was that I do believe that he inherited the Tesla technology. I won't look for it now, but that was pretty much what happened with that. And I'll just play this as well. So I just thought that was interesting, just to see the connections between the time traveling Back to the Future and Biff and Donald Trump, and kind of that time traveling feature all connected, as well as the technology to Tesla. And the last thing I'll share now is just a recently posted Financial Post document in Canada here. So we are completely exposed in the north, why Canada needs to unlock the Arctic now. Donald Trump has forced a new urgency on the campaign trail and up and down the country to unleash the North's potential or risk Arctic sovereignty and a northern treasure trove of resources. I wonder what those resources could possibly be. Now that we know what's on the other side of the Great Plain of the Earth. And they just kind of talk about here, given that all roads lead to Donald Trump lately, it is no mystery why. In launching a trade war against Canada, the United States is no longer a friendly ally, and that is a driving reason behind why the narrative around roads that do not get built in the Arctic has shifted to one that Canada better start building roads, deep water ports, naval installations, mines, power grids, and fiber optic networks as soon as possible, or risk ceding its Arctic sovereignty and a northern treasure house of critical minerals. They always talk about critical minerals. I mean, doesn't that sound scientific to you? Critical minerals. Interesting. And then they just talk more about mining and energy reserves and things like that. But it is my view that we live in a time of great deception, as most of us would agree. And we know who the prince of the power of the air is. We know that the encompassing of the camp of the saints in the beloved city is kind of next on the radar. And all of the energy that's forming around us to keep us on our knees, to keep us weak, and to keep us uninformed, and to gather and harvest our data, and to use us as really energy slaves, because we pay them to use energy that was freely provided to us in the beginning. But you know, their time is short, and the Lord Jesus is not going to tarry long. I believe that the veil is being lifted, as we read about in Isaiah. And, you know, Jesus Christ is setting up his kingdom. It's an eternal kingdom of peace that will never end. It's increasing, and it will never end. So as much as we feel weighed down by some of this information, I know it weighs me down at times, be encouraged that the Lord is on your side. He will not let us fall. He will not let us go into this slavery for eternity. This will come to an end. And I truly believe that we are in the very, very end. And, you know, the Lord is going to lead us. Just we need to seek the Lord. We need to ask him for direction. We need to continually be in prayer and reading the word. The word of God is a lamp unto our feet and a light unto our path. We have to use it. Otherwise, we'll lose our way. It is our light. And Jesus is the light. He's the way, the truth, and the life. And, you know, he will. And he is calling people. You know, if you're here and you're listening to this and you're still listening to this, you know, it says, my sheep know my voice and they follow me. And I know that I can hear the voice of Jesus. And I'm sure you can too. And that's why we're here, you know, and that's indication of itself that we are where we should be right now. So pray about anything that you feel the Lord calling you to. Be sure that God's voice is the voice that you hear, not just fear. Like, don't lean into fear. Don't lean into worry and anxiety. Know that the Lord is the victor, and we're not going to lie down and just be destroyed. You know, the Lord will give us strength. His grace is sufficient. You know, he is our strength in weakness. So be encouraged. And as I said at the beginning, 2 Corinthians 10:4. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. So let's pull down these strongholds and be encouraged. Go forth in faith, and we're all together in this. So take care. God bless. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.